morning to all present here. On behalf of the Center for Southeast Asian Studies, it is my privilege to deliver the welcome address. Today we have four esteemed guests to discuss their perspectives on the issue of ASEAN and China on South China Sea dispute. We have with us Dr. Swaran Singh. Dr. Singh is a professor for diplomacy and disarmament at Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He has 25 years of experience in research and teaching. He has given lectures at several institutions including the National Defence College, Defence Service Staff College, Foreign Services Institute and the Indian Institute for Public Administration. He also contributes to radio and television discussions. We welcome you, sir. Our second panelist is Mr. Abhijit Singh, Senior Fellow at Head of the Maritime Policy Initiative, Observer Research Foundation. He's a maritime professional with specialist and command experience in frontline Indian naval ships. He's a keen commentator on maritime matters and has written extensively on security and governance issues in the Indian Ocean and Pacific littorals. You welcome you, sir. Senior Research Associate and Coordinator for Southeast Asia and Ocean Center at the Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis, Delhi. Dr. Singh has participated in Track 2 and 1.5 dialogues with Myanmar, New Zealand and Australia. He has published on the role of military in Southeast Asia, India-Vietnam strategic relations, India's Look-East policy and Act-East policies, and India's strategic engagement with Southeast Asia at multilateral levels. We welcome you, sir. Our final panelist is Captain Sarabjit Singh Parmar, Senior Fellow, National Maritime Foundation. He's a naval aviator who has been in the realm of maritime security, strategy, doctrine and concepts for more than a decade. As directing staff at the Indian Defence Services Staff College, he headed the National Strategy and International Law modules. As director in the Directorate of Strategic Concepts and Transformation at Naval Headquarters, he was part of the core team which revised Indian Navy's unclassified maritime security strategy, document and doctrine. We welcome you, sir. There's a slight change in the format for the event. Our first panelist would be Dr. Swaran Singh, as he has to leave a little early. His remarks will be followed by a small section of question and answers with him. The rest of the event will proceed as per the agenda that was circulated. I now hand over the session to our chair, Dr. Naginpa Kipkin, Associate Professor and Executive Director for the Center, to commence the panel discussion.
Hello. Thank you very much, Sonia. And as a Director of Center for Southeast Asian Studies, I also would like to welcome personally to our guest speakers and also the audience who are here today. Each speaker will be given 20 minutes. Then, as the welcome address said, there will be one first round of Q&A session after the first speaker, because he has to leave early. For those of us who follow very closely what's happening in South China Sea, in fact, it's a very timely and very important time to organize this kind of event. But unfortunately, if we look at the academic calendar, there are many students who have to do their final submissions, prepare for their final exam. That's why we cannot have a larger audience. But today we are going to do recording, video and still camera as well. And also it's a live streaming. And we'll try to upload all these sessions in YouTube, maybe a day or two from now, so that people can watch from their home any time. And I'm also inviting some of my friends around the world to follow us online today. Directly they are following us as we speak. Well, of course, there are several important issues about South China Sea. Currently, I'm teaching a course on South China Sea disputes, and I'm having some of my students are here, and they'll be asking questions as well. And of course, as we all know, why South China is very complicated. It's largely, there are several reasons. One reason being it's overlapping claim areas. And of course, there's about great power rivalry between America and China. And also because of the resources, there are several other issues. And we are expecting our speakers to dwell on all those several issues. And they have been given a specific topic. And I want all the audience to listen very carefully and have a very well-prepared question so that you can ask those questions during the Q&A session. And we'll be limiting only about 3 questions for the first round of Q&A session for Professor Sorensen. And now the floor is for Dr. Sorensen, 20 minutes.
Thank you, Professor Kipken. Thank you, Sonia, for introducing me. The introduction looks dated, that makes me feel younger. So I'm extremely happy to be here in your beautiful campus. I come from, as Cambridge Oxford talks about the other university, which is a public university. So we have our strengths and you have yours. The first visit is a very delighting experience to be there. Thank you also to Abhijit for accommodating, again also accommodating, because it's not usual that professors are supposed to be busy, but it seems today we have a meeting that I cannot escape. So, given my fear of my first visit at distance, I will try to leave by maybe 12 or a little before 12. So thank you. The subject for discussion, as Professor said, is extremely topical, extremely interesting and of great relevance to scholars in India and scholars in Asia. And I will just like to draw your attention to why are we talking and discussing this today. Why should we spend our time and focus on South China Sea? That's why I requested them to put the map for all of us to see when I speak. The size of this maritime territory is about the size of Western Europe. So depending on how the littoral nations of South China Sea grow in coming years, or how they have been growing in these years, last few decades, this could be an extremely significant part of the planet, influencing trends and trajectories, not just in this region, but beyond this region. Second, very closely, the understanding that all of us have, human activities in any case are moving from continents to oceans. Increasingly, we are becoming dependent, and there is a buzzword now about blue economy, for leisure, for resources, for transportation, for everything that we need oceans. In fact, sometimes we joke that if humans had known their planet better, they would have named it water instead of earth. So human activities are expanding and becoming maritime increasingly, while maritime spaces will be of tremendous importance in coming years. Now this maritime territory is especially interesting because enormous amount of energy trade that happens from, if you notice, the western part, the Middle East, to East Asia, which is the driver of rapid development in East Asia, makes these part of maritime areas extremely critical for continuous development and therefore even for security of all these countries that we are talking of here. And center of these new Zeitgeist, as if German would say, is China, which is an example of how a nation can really turn around and transform itself using sheer economic progress. We talk about rise of China, but I always underline it's only in the limited bandwidth of economic growth rates that China is rising. There is so much more yet left. You must have heard recently, Amir Khan is the superstar in China. So in terms of Bollywood, the soft power that India carries, Chinese are nowhere close to that. Last year, the foreign movie to gross highest amount, 1.8 trillion yuan, was Dangal. So remember, it's a limited bandwidth of economic growth rates which makes China really buzzing. And that is happening to several other tiger economies, as they were called, from Southeast Asia, and now India is another country on the rise, with 7% growth rates of, again, 1 billion population. So this region itself is becoming important what 20th century saw in cross-Atlantic as leading trends for rest of the global politics, assumption is then Asia Pacific, and now we talk of Indo-Pacific because of drift to maritime, potentially becoming really critical area to determine global affairs. And at center of Indo-Pacific is South China Sea. So significance of what we are talking about need not be expressed beyond this point. Now, second issue which makes it very critical is that it is not just potentially the most critical area to determine global trends, but it's also one of the most contentious. We all talk about artificial islands being built by Chinese, but they're not alone. Everyone who can is doing it, except the Chinese can do much better, much bigger, much faster. So therefore, China becomes the focus of this whole island, artificial island construction, which different reportage will tell you is turning into either radar centers or ports or even military bases, rehabilitation staging points. There are multiple interpretations, but Chinese presence is really very critical, and several assessments, and one could go into details of various institutions coming to more or less say that China is now in almost full control of South China Sea. That is a de facto reality. Now, de jure again, in 1948, Chinese had published a map. In India, China, we talk about 1958 map that demonstrated the border with India. This South China Sea map in 1948 from China created a 9-dash line, initially 11, but then 9-dash line, which covers about 90% of this space that we are discussing, which can be as far as 2,000 kilometers from Chinese coast and as close as few hundred meters or few hundred kilometers from the other littoral states. So literally knocking at door of littoral states around South China Sea is 90% claim of China. And China now having become really powerful, and all of you are reading about Xi Jinping emerging as the next emperor, which is a bit of an exaggeration, makes it likely that they would now like to reclaim what they thought is theirs, because they have now the capacities to do that. And they apparently have no patience for long drawn negotiations. And therefore muscle flexing and unilateral claiming is something that we are noticing, which makes this region very edgy, if not on the brinkmanship as of now. It's anxiety prone at least. We have another, some people don't believe it's a country, called Taiwan. Now, given the fact that Chinese claims to South China Sea, 90% of it are based on two things: discovery and historical usage. In no man's land, anyone who reached first, anchored his boat, owns that land. So, Chinese claim that they were the first ones to discover and anchor and utilize several of these features, which are around 200 of them together. They are small islands, they are reefs, shoals, just rocks. In fact, that makes it very uncomfortable sea as well, because navigation, those in the forces would have a better idea. Navigation requires clean oceans and clean coastlines. And in that sense, it's infested with about 200 features, let's call in general features, instead of naming each of them separately. So Chinese are claiming almost all of them. And they have the capacity, as I mentioned, to really muscle flex on these things. Now, drawing from there, the second claimant I was mentioning, the country or not to be the country, is Taiwan, has similar claims, because they still believe that they are really mainland China. Some of them still believe that, though that issue is almost getting over and dead. But they are claimants as well, and they own some of these features and islands. In fact, they have post offices on one of them. Then you have the other two major countries, the Philippines and Vietnam. Philippines and Vietnam own or control nothing in the northern part. If we had a slightly bigger map of or more detailed map, you would see that there are two sets of islands that we are talking about, Paracels and Spratlys in south. So in 1978 was the last conflict Chinese had with Vietnam, and they control entire Paracels. They have a beautiful tarmac place there, and now they are making similar tarmacs in Spratlys. So in the southern part, where Spratlys are there, Vietnam and Philippines control a couple of these island territories, and they claim on some more which are disputed. And I think Philippines was the most innovative way of doing something, which is where one goes back to China-Philippines conflict. In late 1990s sometime, in a particular little called Second Thomas Shoal, they intentionally grounded one of their civilian ships, and then that has become a baseline for them to really place their personnel on it. And that is where the China-Philippines story begins, which comes much later. There are several other skirmishes that happen. So big two nations that are contentious claimants are Vietnam on the west and Philippines on the east. They are constantly in contestations with China. Then you have on the south Malaysia, which also claims some of these territories, but they broadly believe that whatever falls in their EEZ, which is exclusive economic zone, they would claim that, and they don't carry their claims beyond EEZ. And Brunei is another small, very rich Islamic state there, which owns nothing as of now, but has claims on some of it. But story doesn't end here with the littoral states contesting. If China is on the great rise, China is becoming most important player. There are counter players which are equally strong. For example, United States. United States sees itself as the most preponderant, most powerful resident power in this region. In fact, lately we are hearing that now China is engaging Japan and India to somehow make Asian powers autonomous of United States because of our all darling Trump, the way he is handling these affairs. But as a policy, the United States policy still is to engage South China Sea, and they keep repeatedly patrolling these areas, coming as close as 12, 11 nautical miles to these artificial islands in the name of principle of freedom of navigation and freedom of aviation. But they are present. In fact, one of our friends, C. Raja Mohan, had coined a very interesting phrase to say United States is everybody's neighbor. So United States is everywhere. Now United States has two important allies, United Kingdom and Australia. United Kingdom has sporadically shown interest in patrolling in that region, but Australia has lately become more and more reluctant. Now there are US Marines now posted in Perth, in North. But Australia is becoming increasingly dependent economically. So for them, the largest trading partner, China, is important enough. And if you notice their defense white papers over years, the language has changed in case of Australia over a period of time. Then comes India, which is another interesting player in the region. In our case, we have shown off again and on again interest in South China Sea, which goes back to, I think we were talking in the morning of George Fernandez, who was the first defense minister to talk about India's strategic space, moves from Persian Gulf to South China Sea. The word South China Sea in official parlance was brought by him. But then the more recent, I will not detail the rest of the details, but more recent was the joint statement that Prime Minister Modi signed in January of 2015 with Obama, strategic vision for Indian Ocean and Asia Pacific, which again talked of ensuring stability and security in South China Sea, etc. So several extra regional actors also, and India is one among them, which is getting excited about this territory called South China Sea, is what makes it equally interesting for us to study. Not only because of its positive relevance, but also contestations that are occurring there, and enormous rise of China. And therefore, Chinese version is going to become far more influential in the future, is the concern. Why are so many nations worried about it in this region? Why are they claiming it? Why so much interest on this? Other than the sea lanes of communication that I mentioned, where about 50,000 tankers crisscross every year, there are a lot of other resources. I mentioned the blue economy. There are enormous amount of other resources which are available in this region. And estimates vary, for example, saying that about 12% of the world's fisheries, about 10 million tons every year, could be harnessed from this region. And you remember, food is an interesting issue for future. Food security is very important for future. And some of these nations where economic growth is really faster, consumption levels really going on, improving, expanding, dependence on ocean for food is going to increase over a period of time. But other than food, prosperity also raises demand for energy. And in terms of energy again, not only oil tankers as I mentioned, or ore which is passing through this region, but it's also a region which has enormous amount of both oil and gas. And different estimates again vary, talking about 11 billion barrels of reserves in the South China Sea, around Strathclyde, and about 190 trillion cubic feet of gas available in this. So enormous resources being available in the region, and of course the infested, increasing traffic of foreign trade, especially of energy tankers, is what is making everybody really make sure they have a finger in the pie and they don't lose in the game just by China bullying around all the time. Now, I will now come very quickly for next couple of minutes on the arbitration part of it, because there was hope that that could set a certain standard for China to behave. Because China is the most important game changer in this case, and if an arbitration comes, it could create some kind of code of conduct. And that arbitration was based on provisions of UNCLOS, United Nations Convention on Law of Seas, which is described as a constitution for open oceans. It is signed by about 157 nations, effective from 1984. So it's like we all follow Constitution of India when we live there. UNCLOS is believed to be the constitution for open oceans, and all nations have to abide by it. Particularly, it has 4 kinds of dispute settlement provisions which are already listed in UNCLOS, and it talks about 4 ways of resolving issues. One is that they could go to international tribunal for set up by Law of Seas, the convention itself. They could also go to International Court of Justice. But interesting it is, there is a building called Peace Palace in Geneva, which hosts both the arbitration, permanent arbitration court, and also the International Court of Justice is right there. Of course, there's also law school there, if some of you belong to law school there. And they could also then fourth create a special arbitration tribunal for this purpose. So UNCLOS has clear provisions in terms of dispute, how that needs to be resolved. And under that, President Aquino of Philippines had taken, after a lot of skirmishes in later part of the first decade of 21st century, in 2013 she had taken that case to Permanent Court of Arbitration. 5 minutes, thank you. That I was buried my blessed time. So she had taken the case to this Permanent Court of Arbitration. They had made 15 submissions on various issues against Chinese. Now Chinese never participated, never accepted the jurisdiction of the Permanent Court of Arbitration, and they go back to say that while signing they had already submitted an article of reservation that arbitration conclusions of UNCLOS will not be mandatory for Chinese, and they will not really be implemented. So it's not only when the case came that they were abstaining from it, they were avoiding entertaining this case, but they had said that much earlier. So they literally did not attend any of the proceedings, did not submit any papers, did not do any responding. And finally in 2016, in July, one-sided arbitration was delivered. And of course, one-sided arbitration clearly accepted all the 15 submissions and found that sovereignty and claims of Philippines were valid. And it also revoked, very interestingly, that all the historical claimed that are laid by Chinese based on the 9-dash line are invalid. Now this was perhaps very revolutionary arbitration, very one could even say strong or harsh arbitration, because they had clear assumption of how Chinese will respond. So arbitration perhaps was based on a premise of not accepting China to come on board, not allowing China to come on board, not creating situation where Chinese could comply with that kind of arbitration. So arbitration itself was aware of this reality, because they knew the response the Chinese have had throughout the year. Such a one-sided arbitration itself was seen by the world that fine, it is a strong arbitration, but it's not pragmatic. It's not going to be really complied by Chinese, and compliance, as UNCLOS says, is final. Provisions of UNCLOS, United Nations Convention, say that arbitration would be final, and parties that go to arbitration will have to comply with it. There is no other recourse. But Chinese, because of their reservation that they had submitted in advance, because they never participated in proceedings of arbitration, they flaunted it, saying that they don't accept that arbitration, it means nothing for them. That was on expected lines. But something was to happen which was not on expected lines. Because in May of 2016, Philippines had elections. And Philippines produced a leader, Rodrigo Duterte, which is famous for several things that he has done and several things that he has said. But let us restrict to what he said about arbitration of July of 2016. Now it's interesting that on 30th June itself he had been sworn in as president, so it was just very timely. And the judgment comes within next 10 days. So his first response as president of Philippines was that he is happy to receive that arbitration and he would respect that arbitration, but he would also advise all the stakeholders to really stay calm and sober and not overreact to the arbitration the way it has come about. But we saw very soon that his follow-up speeches and follow-up actions were very different. And he soon started visiting Beijing and started hobnobbing with President Xi Jinping, and ultimately saying that he doesn't really care about claims in South China Sea, at least the western part of Philippines Ocean, as long as he's able to push his development agenda much faster. And you will now be reminded by several other, shall I say, dabang leaders, which are very, it's a normal thing now to have strong, powerful, ambitious leaders, decisive leaders, and most of them have this very interesting development discourse, which is very emphatic. You look around several examples. Now, development discourse, the latest one is Kim Jong-un, for example. He's saying, I have built my nuclear arsenal, I want to use it now to push my development agenda. So he's now seeking concessions. So, I'm not naming some examples, but many examples. The development agenda was pushed so hard that he was willing to now lower the Chinese to seek investments in the Philippines and not insist on the issue of arbitration. Not just that, he has finally agreed to what Chinese have always been saying of joint development agreement. And I think that's where it is today, it seems. And the final point I want to underline, because I've just maybe 30 seconds or 40 seconds left now, is in this whole process, not only the credibility of arbitration as a process has been undermined, but much more the credibility of both Philippines, and I would extend the argument since we are talking ASEAN, even of ASEAN, credibility has really been hurt because they have not really followed through the legal recourse, which was, and this was the 15th arbitration, it's not the first arbitration under UNCLOS. Several arbitrations that have really resolved several issues before. This was perhaps the most startling arbitration that came about, and thanks to Philippines and ASEAN, and the new leader in Philippines more particularly, that I think the arbitration did not come the way it should have come and was not followed up the way it should have followed. And therefore, to me, the credibility of both Philippines as state and ASEAN as an organization stands really under question now. And I think that's a matter of worrying, because that credibility of UNCLOS also comes into question if this is how implementation happens of arbitration of provisions of UNCLOS. Thank you so much. I would like to few seconds.
Thank you so much, Professor Swansingh. In fact, the reason why I was begging you is because you have to lead us by 12, so we need to have a few minutes for question and answer session. Before we proceed on that, I would like to welcome our Vice Dean of School of International, Professor Amora. He was the former Vice Foreign Minister of Syria to India, so we are glad to have him here. Now, we would like to have 3 questions. And sorry, the rest you have to hold on because the professor has to leave early. I have Madhavi to ask the first question. Yeah, Madhavi. Do you have a mic? Hold on, let's go.
Thank you, sir. My question to you is whether you feel that China's rejection of the jurisdiction of the arbitral tribunal, which was constituted under UNCLOS, whether that shuts the door entirely on the possibility of legal resolution of the dispute, and whether you feel that this rejection has basically undermined the use of international law as a tool to end the dispute.
Okay, the second one from Devanshi.
Thank you for your insight, sir. My question to you is, how have Beijing's policies regarding its territorial claims in the East and the South China Sea shaped regional efforts to settle the dispute, since you mentioned the various players?
Okay, we'll take one more. So please identify yourself.
I'm Shubhangi, and my question would be,
From which school?
I'm from JGLS. Yeah, so my question would be that the Chinese government has been telling their people that the UNCLOS has no maritime, it does not actually have any legitimacy on the delimitation from mandatory dispute settlement. Basically, part of this salami slicing technique and their justification is that in alignment to what they're saying to their people, because that's how they're justifying their actions.
Thank you. Very pointed questions. If I knew the caliber, I should have pegged it a little higher. I was elementary in my initial speaking. International law undermined, as you mentioned. I think that's a major concern, as I underlined towards the end. Why so? I think that's important. I'm going to be telegraphic because of shortage of time, and let me make a very controversial statement. Just like religion, law is a fiction that Homo sapiens have created. And to make law, particularly international law, effective, other levers of power, levers of influence must be kept in consideration. So to reinforce UNCLOS as most dependable mechanism of resolving maritime issues, the politics of it should have been taken care of, and I think that was missing. Why international law is appearing to be weakened after this example. But Beijing's policy, how is it influencing the other regional players and regional groupings? I think Beijing's enormous economic rise, and now we are talking of Belt and Road Initiative, which is going to give infrastructure to everybody at home on terms and conditions that people can't refuse. That enormous economic prowess Chinese have utilized, and they have always maintained that they would prefer to talk all these issues in bilateral format rather than multilateral format. So, regional organization, the most visible in this case is ASEAN. They have not allowed ASEAN to take on this issue together vis-a-vis Chinese. And on the other side, flip side of the coin, ASEAN also has failed to develop a joint strategy. Only 4 of the 10 have issues with South China Sea, and others don't want to rattle their relationship with China and benefits that they draw from China by standing in line and singing the same tune, which is harsh and the Chinese. So Chinese have somehow managed successfully to not allow regional body ASEAN to create a combined kind of response on South China Sea. There is code of conduct, etc., but that's also not very effective in this case. I have no time to go into it. Let me quickly reflect to the third question of maritime and land issues, and that's a very interesting point she has raised here. Chinese have said we do not increasingly justify UNCLOS as the format which should be used to deal with these issues of maritime sovereignty of China and others in South China Sea, because they are saying these are landed properties of China. These are not maritime properties. They are saying islands are territories, and UNCLOS has only to deal with oceans, and it doesn't deal with territories. And they have now several of these territories inhabited. You know what makes, I'm sure you all know, but the definition of island is when you can survive on that island on your own without being dependent on others. That is not fulfilled in many of these islands that China controls today. But they are calling them as island, and they are saying this is not where UNCLOS should be actually applied. And that's a very interesting, innovative way of really saying that this arbitration doesn't belong here. But original argument was that of the reservation, but now this is a new argument they are giving that this doesn't simply belong here. Thank you so much. I should stop here and keep respecting my time. And it was a delight to be here with all of you. And I look forward to more opportunities to be here with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Okay, we will have to continue with our next speaker, which is Vijay Singh. Unfortunately, as a chair of the session, I would like to take a request all the speakers to try to finish within 15 minutes, because we started a little bit late, about 10 minutes or so. But if we have time, we'll spend most time doing the question and answer session. So now the floor is for Abhijit Singh. Want to say something? Okay.
No.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Nitin, for inviting me for this and for that very generous introduction. I've never been to the general school earlier, and actually I've never been to a university like this earlier. So I don't know how much I'm going to enjoy this, but I enjoyed that walk around that place. So as you know, my background, I'm a former naval officer, spent a few years at sea, been studying maritime subjects for a while now. Let me start by saying this. You know, in every area of research and analysis, there is one particular area which is called a black hole subject. Now, what's a black hole subject? If you were, for instance, discussing space, outer space, and astronomy, no matter what you're discussing, planets, intergalactic travel, stars, you finally end up discussing the black hole. The black hole is an existential issue. We all want to know whether we're going to end up in the black hole. What it's going to do to civilization, to Earth, to everything around it. The South China Sea, to put it very simply, is the black hole subject of maritime domain, which is to say that no matter what you're discussing, the Indian Ocean, the Pacific, the Atlantic, you always end up with discussing the South China Sea, because it lies at the heart of maritime geopolitics. Now, as a segue into my remarks, and they're going to be short remarks, I won't dwell on many of these things for too long. Let me, to make this interesting, refer to a little anecdote. 2 years back, I was at the South China Sea conference that was conducted by Vietnam in Nha Trang. My first time in Vietnam. I have never been part of such a discussion that has both the big powers, the Americans, the Chinese, there was also the French and Japanese and the others. And I happened to be on a panel in which there was an American and a Chinese, and Vietnamese, and there was two special discussants, one of them from Philippines, the other from Indonesia. The American admiral first spoke, and he said something very interesting. He made a very civil presentation, but it was a sharp presentation. And he pointed out that China actually had got this whole arbitral tribunal thing wrong. He didn't say it in as many words, he was very polite. But what he was wanting to say is that the Chinese, by opting out of the proceedings, had done more harm to themselves than good. Because look, he said, this arbitral tribunal, and for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, in 2013, the Philippines took China to court, the maritime court, to say that their activities within their EEZs were a violation of the law. But as the American admiral explained, the Philippines did not raise any questions about the disputes per se. What the Philippines had asked for was a clarification. And the clarification essentially on 3 counts, something Professor Soran has already spoken about, but let me just say this. The Philippines was interested from getting a clarification from the court whether the 9-dash line that China always keeps talking about is a valid means of staking a historical claim in the South China Sea. Simply a clarification. The second, the Philippines wanted to know from the court whether these features within the Spratlys can be termed as islands. And the reason it wanted to know that if they were islands, then they generated a territorial sea and they generated an EEZ, which is an exclusive economic zone for those of you that don't follow the maritime discourse. And the third thing that the Philippines wanted to know is whether China's activities within that EEZ, their own Philippines EEZ close to Scarborough Shoal, amounted to a violation because it was simply detrimental to the maritime health, to the health of marine life there. And on all 3 counts, the court had ruled in favor of Philippines and against China, but there was no mention at all of a territorial dispute. Now this was smart strategy on the part of the Philippines because as per the law, you cannot take another party to court if it is a territorial dispute. The court is not authorized to adjudicate on a matter in which you bring up a sovereignty or territorial dispute, so China should have joined it. Now what was very interesting for me is that when the Chinese academic responded, he responded with a barely concealed contempt. Not contempt for the American, but a contempt for Philippines. And he said that this is a legal ambush. It is perfidy. We have been betrayed by the Philippines because we were supposed to sort this matter out under the DOC. Now the DOC is an internal, for those of you that follow, is an internal declaration of the conduct of parties. It has no legal teeth, it has no legal bearing, but the Chinese were insisting that we were. Now, no one opposed it. The Philippines were almost embarrassed that they had taken China to court. The Indonesians did not choose to speak on the matter at all. They were speaking about the maritime fulcrum tactics, which was the maritime fulcrum strategy that President Joko Widodo has come up with. Nobody addressed the question head on. It was left to the delegate from the UK to finally offer some pushback to the Chinese presentation or Chinese aggression. I came away with 3 distinct impressions. First, the South China Sea is not just about the disputes that's happening, it's not even about the resources which is there. For China, it is a question of Chinese identity. This goes down to a very deep-seated chauvinism within China. And the Chinese believe that they have, for some reason, been denied their rightful place under the sun. This is a conspiracy against China's rights. And when you're dealing with such a state or with a partner that holds such views, it's very difficult to have an honest-to-goodness conversation. That was my first takeaway. My second takeaway was that this discourse on the South China Sea is essentially being mediated by just 2 players, China and the US. The rest of us actually are just onlookers. We have the sides, our opinions don't matter, but the real problem is that we are being forced to take sides. And there is a price to pay, as China has made it known, on those actors that choose not to take sides. And therefore, you're one side or the other. Either you support the US or you support China, but if you stay in the middle, you actually earn the ire of both sides. My third takeaway was that under pressure from China, what these small states are resorting to as a counter strategy is not so much, and I'm assuming here that a lot of you sitting here know international relations, and you always learn about balancing and bandwagoning. The rest of the smaller states within the South China Sea are not doing so much balancing and bandwagoning. What they're doing is strategic hedging. And strategic hedging essentially means that you're acting in contradictory ways simply to broaden your options, to reduce the risk and to maximize gains. Now, this is a very risky strategy because it creates great uncertainty in the minds of all the other players. Now, 18 months from the time that I attended that conference, have things changed? Yes and no. No, because all the things that I just mentioned are equally true today as they were then. Yes, because what we're seeing evolve are the bare outlines, the bare contours of two distinct strategies. They're still evolving, but they are tangible. You can see them evolve. On the Chinese side, I would say, and again, for those who study, this should be interesting, there's a three-pronged strategy, or actually a 3.5-pronged strategy that I see in forward. The Chinese first are resorting to this dual strategy of what they say, coercion and inducement. Coercion meaning trying to use force to get the other partners to forward stick us. And inducements in that they're offering greater development, joint development, oil and gas exploration, investments in maritime infrastructure, as you know, under the One Belt, One Road or the Belt and Road initiatives. So there are some ways creating an economic incentive for small players to come and support the Chinese position. But on the other side, they're using force. And for those of you that have been following the maritime domain, Vietnam very recently was forced to send a Spanish company that was drilling for oil within CSEAS called Repsol, because the Chinese had put so much pressure. The Chinese have also increased their maritime militia presence close to the Scarborough shore. They now control all the access points to the Scarborough shore. So that's again an example of how coercion and inducement is going hand in hand, side by side. The second, I would say, is that the Chinese are experts in creating facts on the ground. They're just changing the geography of the South China Sea. And if you look at the reclamation and militarization that is happening within the Spratly Islands, and particularly 3 of those islands where they have constructed, I've got just 5 minutes. So they've constructed these airfields, they've other garrisons, etc. It becomes very clear that the Chinese actually want to control the South China Sea. They have now installed radars, they have installed some communication jamming equipment, and the US now, the senior US admiral who's being interviewed a few days back, is the nominee for the Pacific Command, and he said very clearly that China now controls the South China Sea, barring a war with the US. He said, if we've got to get back control of the South China Sea, we've got to fight with them. On the American side, I'm just going to quickly wrap up because I've got just 5 minutes. The Americans have come up with a strategy called the Free and Open Indo-Pacific. Now, under the Free and Open Indo-Pacific, America wants to work with all its other partners to create a rules-based order. On the face of it, it looks pretty sound because the Americans are also promising to increase their maritime presence, their naval presence within the South China Sea, and are doing so. There's 3 aircraft carriers recently within the South China Sea. The trouble, I think, with the Free and Open Indo-Pacific is that it is completely dependent, or in the main it is dependent on the partnership between 4 major democracies called the quadrilateral democracies, Australia, Japan, India, and the US. But this strategy doesn't seem to be going down very well with ASEAN, because ASEAN believes it detracts from the centrality of ASEAN in the whole Indo-Pacific. They actually don't like the fact that Asia-Pacific is now Indo-Pacific. Plus, a lot of other countries are seeing this as an Asian NATO, which is again provocative, and it's not going down too well with these states. Now, the ASEAN is a house divided. It does play a part in these big power rivalries. But look at the way in which President Duterte, that again Professor Soren spoke about, has actually been compromised and cultivated by China, to the extent that the Filipino president now is almost a front man for China and Chinese interests. But the Chinese are doing this with country after country, and every country now, just recently at the Boer Forum, the Singaporeans were almost on their knees telling China to let's get into a partnership with each other, because the Trump policies, this Trump America first and all of that, just bilateral trade, protectionism is not going down very well with these countries. Last, I don't have too much time, I'm going to take just final 2 points, is that from the two countries that we are seeing some concrete action happening in the South China Sea that's actually coherent and makes sense to a lot of us is actually Japan and Australia. Japan's version of the free and Indo-Pacific, unlike the American model, has an economic component to it. The Japanese are insisting on infrastructure building. They're doing a lot of work with India and other ASEAN partners within there. They're insisting on development and other areas where there can be an economic benefit for all sides. The Australians have a more hawkish line on China. They have increased their presence within the South China Sea, but at the same time, the Australians also want a sort of an alliance with ASEAN in which they can build infrastructure together. And that, for an Indian onlooker, for an Indian observer, is a positive development. Finally, what is India's take on this matter? I believe we are more aware of what is happening in the region. We're more informed of the South China Sea, but really we are proactive fence sitters. We are still on the fence, but we are speaking in a loud voice, more voluble, more visible. But we really, for all practical purposes, still on the fence. We still talk about freedom of navigation, freedom of overflight, other things, peaceful resolution of the disputes. But I don't think we are at any point thinking of getting involved into the disputes. My recommendation, if I have one more minute, would be for India to understand that the competing interests between the various players is making this great power rivalry in the South China Sea more fraught. And if India does not take a firm stand on these matters, we will be left by the wayside. During the recent ASEAN-India summit, ASEAN leaders said so much to the Indian side. That infrastructure building, integration, connectivity is fine, but we want to take a harder stand on what's happening in the South China Sea, Chinese aggression in the region. I think we've got to stop being fence sitters and play a role, but we have to understand that whichever way you mediate this whole dispute, ultimately you've got to look for what is in English called a modus vivendi, which is look for a way of working with all sides. We are open to working with China. The Chinese have got to stop this open aggression, and unless we don't make our presence felt on the world stage, on the ASEAN stage, I don't think we're going to make much progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abhijit. Though for those of you who have not got a chance to look at the program, the first speaker, Professor Swarenson, was talking on the topic 2016 arbitration ruling and the ramifications. And Abhijit Singh was talking on a topic, great power rivalry in the South China Sea. So, as I have been saying to my students, whenever we talk about South China Sea disputes, we cannot avoid talking. There is always overlapping issues. So if you listen to all speakers, some of them will touch upon the same issue because that's the nature of the conflict or the nature of the complexity. So having said that, now I would like to invite my friend Dr. Uday Bhalu Singh from IDSA. He is going to talk about ASEAN perspective on the South China Sea disputes.
First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Fikrin and OP Jindal University for inviting me here. This is my first visit to this university, and it's been a pleasure to see this university coming.
Do you have a pointer? Do you have
So basically I want to talk about the various perspectives of the ASEAN countries on the South China Sea. The area that we are now talking about is not Asia Pacific. We are talking about the Indo-Pacific, the larger area, which basically includes both the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, and extending right from Australia and the Pacific Islands down to the East African coast. So there has been a change in the way we are looking at this entire region, and this is the larger Indo-Pacific region. To put it in perspective, and South China Sea is a part of it. Basically, there has been a shift from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific, and this shift is very significant from the point of view of strategy, from the way the nations of the world are looking at this region. Primary reason for that is the economic transformation that this region has witnessed. The countries of this region are leaders of economic transformation, and there has been a lot of development taking place from the tiger economies that was mentioned earlier to China rising and also India rising. All this has led to its impact on the maritime domain. There has been an impact on the maritime domain because when you have economies developing in this region, whether it is ASEAN, whether it is East Asia, the economic development leads to some kind of a pressure on the maritime domain. That means you require stocks which are free, and you can travel from one point to another easily, and it promotes transportation, free and easy transportation. And also the energy routes are located in this area, and that also needs to be ensured. This has led to arterial forms of shipping. There are certain choke points which can be a problem for area of concern for the countries in the region. So nations, particularly the more advanced nations like China, are very conscious that these choke points are don't become a problem for their maritime domain, and therefore they are looking at various alternatives in case there is a blockage of trade routes in the sea. And that is why you come across such proposals like the Kra Canal across Thailand, how to avoid the Malacca dilemma in case the Malacca Straits are blocked. That is one of the main concerns of China, and you have China looking at a route through Myanmar to the Indian Ocean, so that some of its areas which are landlocked can have access not only to the South China Sea but to the Indian Ocean. So this is the way the Indo-Pacific has been developing in the region and affecting the maritime domain. Now, as far as the South China Sea is concerned, we find that the situation has been both complex and simple. It is complex primarily because of the multiple disputes that are taking place in this region between China on the one hand, Taiwan, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesia as the countries which are involved in the maritime disputes in the South China Sea. The simplicity lies in the fact that only one claimant, which is China, which is doing the primary job of regional primacy. It is China which is going to dominate this region, and it is moving in that direction. Whereas the others are only protecting their claims. Whatever claims they have in the South China Sea, they are trying to maintain the status quo. Whereas China is claiming almost 90%, as the previous speakers have spoken, 90% of the South China Sea. Now the significance of this region, the South China Sea, is that slogs account for half of global ship tonnage in the sea. Third of global crude oil passes through it. Half of global LNG trade passes through the South China Sea. In fact, even coal from Australia and Indonesia are routed through this region. Asian countries, because they have become factories for the world, are using the maritime domain for all the transport. In fact, maritime transport has become the cheapest available source for transporting finished products, and also, of course, the natural resources. Oil and gas reserves pass through this area. Oil and gas reserves, in fact, within underneath the surface of the South China Sea is what the nations of this world have their eyes on. And of course, as you know, keeping in mind the food security, the fisheries potential of this region makes South China Sea very important. Now, if you look at the South China Sea situation as a whole, unresolved maritime disputes make this region important. Uncertainty about the freedom of navigation, that is a concern of the less powerful nations. And if you look at the history of these disputes, in 1992, ASEAN as an organization tried to solve some of this problem by adopting the declaration on the South China Sea. And the objective of this was to urge self-restraint by all parties. And later on in 2002, ASEAN and China signed a non-binding declaration of conduct, or the DOC as it is called. The importance of DOC is that it is not yet a lawful kind of document. It is not a legal document. It is a non-binding declaration of conduct. Then in 2012, ASEAN, which meets quite often, meets regularly, at a meeting, ASEAN Summit, normally they have a joint communique at the end of each summit and meeting. But in 2012, differences on the South China Sea were such that they were unable to produce a joint communique that year. 2012 is a landmark year because it shows that ASEAN was failing somewhere. It was failing because of lack of agreement on an important issue like the South China Sea. And the reason was that the meeting which was held in Phnom Penh in Cambodia was being influenced adversely by China. And because of the pressure of China, the agreement at Phnom Penh could not produce a joint communique because China did not want any adverse mention of Chinese role in the South China Sea. Why is ASEAN concerned? There are obvious economic reasons for this. There are economic gains to be had by control of South China Sea. The natural resources I have already mentioned, the fisheries, the energy resources which lie underneath the bed of the sea, military reasons. Because of this South China Sea region being so important, there has been an escalation of the military budget in each of the ASEAN countries. If you look at the last decade or so, you find that the military budgets of all these countries has been rising, and rising quite dramatically. And there has been an investment in military hardware in most of the countries, including Indonesia, including Myanmar, including Singapore. All these countries have seen military purchases in all the three wings. And in the maritime domain, especially the navies have been expanding over the years. Geopolitical reasons, you have all the major powers interested in this region, and their extra-regional presence is creating its own dynamics. And in fact, the presence of the US ship recently in South China Sea was a cause of concern because it created a lot of tension with China, and this is an important factor for causing great concern for ASEAN countries. All these 10 ASEAN countries that you see, starting from Myanmar to the Philippines, are involved in one way or another in the South China Sea. How has ASEAN responded to this? ASEAN is faced with many challenges. Presently, we are going to have elections in Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and also Cambodia. The Rohingya crisis is another important event which is disturbing the region. There are continuing tensions within Philippines domestically, but ASEAN as a whole wants to retain the centrality. Through ASEAN-India Common Summit, India-ASEAN Commemoration Summit, which took place in 2018 in New Delhi, there was an agreement between the ASEAN states and India, and the South China Sea did figure in the Delhi Declaration that was signed. How do I see the way ahead? ASEAN can consider two measures for dispute management. One is one way which has been suggested is joint development. Joint development basically means under Article 74 and 83 of UNCLOS, it is a provisional measure applied only in maritime zones where overlapping claims occur, and it is not for resolving sovereignty disputes. For instance, between Vietnam and Malaysia in 1992 in the Gulf of Thailand, and between Vietnam and China on joint fishery zone in the Gulf of Tonkin. China, however, has been using joint development to get recognition to its sovereignty claims and rejects arbitration ruling, which Professor Swaran Singh has mentioned and earlier has been mentioned. Code of conduct is another way of solving this problem, and we are moving towards that. Code of conduct negotiations between ASEAN and China are ongoing, and they began in March 2018, and they are not likely to be concluded by the end of this year, unfortunately. The code of conduct could become more like a forum. That is the danger. That the code of conduct, instead of becoming a binding kind of thing, it may just become another place to talk about, a channel of communication, than a strong measure in practice. Finally, China's Global Times has reacted sharply to the US aircraft carrier Carl Vinson to Vietnam, its visit last month. Vietnam will pursue international law as a core interest and will welcome CONOPS and court calls. Vietnam and Singapore will push for code of conduct and a more meaningful code of conduct under ASEAN framework. Vietnam's Deputy Prime Minister Pham Binh Minh called on ASEAN states to stand up for ASEAN viewpoint on South China Sea and solve disputes through peaceful means. Thank you.